Have you ever tried to forget someone only to realize that the harder you try, the more their presence returns to your mind? No message, no call, no interaction, no explanation. And yet somehow their memory keeps appearing in your thoughts like an uninvited echo. Days pass, weeks pass, sometimes even months, but the image of that person continues to resurface quietly, unexpectedly, almost as if your mind refuses to let the connection disappear. At first, you might dismiss it. You tell yourself it is just coincidence. Maybe it is nostalgia. Maybe it is unfinished emotion. Maybe it is simply your brain replaying familiar memories the way it often does. But then something strange happens. You realize that this is not just a random thought. It is persistent. It appears during moments of silence. It shows up when you are focused on something else. It interrupts ordinary days and reminds you of someone who is no longer part of your daily life. And that raises a deeper question. Why does the mind hold on to certain people long after communication has stopped? Think about how many people you have met in your life. Hundreds, maybe thousands, classmates, coworkers, neighbors, strangers you spoke with briefly and never saw again. Most of those faces fade naturally from memory. Time does what time always does. It moves forward and the mind moves with it. Yet occasionally, one person remains. Not because you are constantly thinking about them intentionally. In fact, sometimes you are doing the opposite. You are trying to move on. You are trying to focus on your own path, and still their presence returns quietly, like a thought that refuses to be erased. Why? Psychologists often say that the human mind does not process unfinished emotional experiences easily. When something meaningful ends without clear closure, the mind continues searching for resolution. It revisits memories, replays conversations, and tries to make sense of moments that once carried significance. It is similar to leaving a book halfway through a powerful chapter. Even if you close the book and walk away, a part of your mind keeps wondering what happens next. But there is another layer to this experience that many people rarely discuss. Sometimes it is not just about memories. It is about impact. Every person we encounter leaves a subtle imprint on our awareness. Most of these impressions are small and temporary. They fade quickly as life moves forward. But occasionally, someone crosses our path in a way that feels different. Maybe the connection was brief but intense. Maybe it felt natural in a way that surprised you. Maybe the conversations carried a depth that is difficult to explain. And when that kind of encounter happens, the mind often remembers. Not because it is trapped in the past, but because it recognizes something meaningful about the interaction. Have you ever noticed that certain people come to mind exactly when you are reflecting on your life? When you are thinking about who you are becoming or questioning the direction of your journey? In those quiet moments, the mind sometimes returns to individuals who once played a role in shaping your perspective. Not everyone who appears in your thoughts represents longing or attachment. Sometimes they represent a chapter of growth, a turning point, a moment where two paths briefly crossed and left a mark on both lives. And when the noise of everyday life fades, the mind naturally revisits the people connected to those moments. But here is where the experience becomes even more intriguing. Sometimes the person who keeps appearing in your mind is not someone you recently interacted with. There has been no conversation, no update, no visible reminder. Life moved forward and communication stopped naturally. Yet, despite the silence, their presence in your thoughts continues to return. Why would the mind revisit someone who is no longer actively part of your life? Most people assume that if a thought keeps returning, it must mean you are holding on emotionally. But that explanation does not always capture the full picture. Human memory is far more complex than simple attachment. Think about the moments in your life that truly shaped you. Often, they are not the longest relationships or the loudest experiences. Sometimes the most powerful impressions come from brief encounters that carried unexpected depth. A single conversation can shift the way you see the world. A short period of connection can reveal something about yourself that you had never noticed before. And when a person becomes linked to that kind of moment, the mind remembers them differently. It is not about obsession. It is about significance. Your mind stores certain memories in a special place, not because they dominate your life, but because they helped form part of your personal story. When you reflect on who you are becoming, those memories quietly rise to the surface. Have you ever noticed that these thoughts often appear during moments of stillness? When you are walking alone, when you are sitting quietly at night, when your mind finally slows down after a long day. In those moments, the constant noise of daily responsibilities fades. The mind begins to wander, and it naturally returns to experiences that carried meaning. This is one reason why certain people continue to appear in our thoughts long after communication ends. They represent unfinished reflections in our own journey of understanding. But there is another interesting detail many people overlook. The mind does not replay memories randomly. It often revisits moments that still contain unanswered questions. Perhaps you never fully understood why that connection felt so natural. Perhaps you never discovered why the relationship ended when it did. Maybe there were things left unsaid or emotions that were never clearly expressed. When a situation ends without full clarity, the mind sometimes continues exploring it quietly in the background. Not to dwell on the past, but to make sense of it. This is part of how human awareness processes experience. We reflect, we analyze, we search for patterns. And sometimes the person who keeps appearing in your mind represents a moment that still holds lessons you have not fully uncovered. But here is an important point that many people misunderstand. Thinking about someone repeatedly does not automatically mean you are meant to reconnect with them. It does not necessarily mean they are thinking about you, and it does not imply any mystical explanation. Often, it simply means that the encounter between you and that person carried a deeper psychological imprint than you first realized. Your mind is not trying to trap you in the past. It is trying to understand the role that experience played in shaping who you are today. In other words, the recurring thought may not be about the other person at all. It may be about you. And when you begin to look at the situation from that perspective, a powerful realization starts to emerge. The person who keeps appearing in your mind may not simply represent a relationship. They may represent a mirror, a reflection of who you were during that time and who you are slowly becoming now. Think about it carefully. Every meaningful encounter in life leaves behind more than just memories of another person. It also captures a snapshot of ourselves, our emotions at that time, our level of awareness, our hopes, fears, and the way we interpreted the world. So when someone repeatedly comes to mind, it may actually be your mind revisiting that version of yourself. What were you feeling during that chapter of your life? What were you searching for? What lessons were unfolding in that moment? Often, the people we remember the most are connected to moments when we were changing, when we were learning something important about trust, identity, boundaries, or purpose. And the mind, in its quiet way, sometimes returns to those moments to ask a deeper question. Have you truly understood what that experience was meant to teach you? Many people believe that closure comes from another conversation. They imagine that if they could just speak to that person one more time, everything would finally make sense. But life rarely works that way. Closure is not always delivered through explanations from others. In many cases, it comes through reflection, through understanding how an experience shaped your perspective and helped you grow. That is why certain memories return when you are thinking about your future. Your mind is connecting the past with the path ahead. Perhaps that person appeared in your life during a time when you were discovering your own strength. Maybe they challenged your assumptions. Maybe they revealed qualities within you that you had never noticed before. And even if the connection ended, the impact remained. Have you ever noticed that the people who stay in your thoughts are often the ones who changed something inside you? They made you question. They made you reflect. They made you see the world through a slightly different lens. In that sense, their role in your life may have already been fulfilled. Not every meaningful connection is meant to last forever. Some are meant to appear briefly, leave an impression, and quietly guide you toward a deeper understanding of yourself. And when the mind revisits those people, it may simply be acknowledging the importance of that moment in your story. But there is another layer to consider. Sometimes the mind holds on to a person because that chapter of your life still carries emotional energy. Not necessarily longing, but recognition, a sense that the encounter mattered in ways that were not obvious at the time. When you start viewing the situation this way, the recurring thought becomes less mysterious and more meaningful. It is not about coincidence. It is not about being trapped in memory. It is about awareness. Your mind is highlighting a moment in your life that played a role in shaping your understanding of connection, growth, and personal direction. And once you understand this, the experience begins to feel very different. Instead of asking, why can't I stop thinking about this person? A more powerful question appears. What is this memory trying to show me about my own journey? The human mind is not designed to hold on to every face it encounters. It filters constantly, allowing most experiences to fade naturally with time. But when a person continues to appear in your thoughts, it often means that the moment connected to them still carries meaning within your personal story, not necessarily because the relationship itself was meant to continue, but because the experience shaped something inside you. Think about how life unfolds. Certain people appear during very specific chapters of our lives, at times when we are uncertain about our direction, at moments when we are learning difficult lessons about trust, independence, or emotional strength. Sometimes their presence brings clarity. Sometimes it brings confusion that forces us to grow. Either way, the encounter leaves a mark, and long after the communication ends, the mind may still revisit that chapter from time to time, not as a signal to return to the past, but as a reminder of what that period of life represented. Growth often works this way. We move forward, yet our awareness occasionally looks back, not to relive the moment, but to understand it more clearly. As time passes and your perspective matures, the meaning of certain experiences becomes easier to see. You may begin to realize that the connection taught you something about your own boundaries or your own values. Perhaps it showed you the kind of understanding you seek in others, or maybe it revealed strengths you didn't realize you possessed. When viewed from this perspective, the recurring thought becomes less about the other person and more about the evolution of your own awareness. And this realization brings a sense of calm, because the mind is not trying to pull you backward. It is helping you integrate a piece of your past into the person you are becoming. Sometimes we assume that meaningful encounters must last forever to be important, but life rarely follows that pattern. Some of the most powerful lessons arrive through temporary connections. They appear at the right moment, influence our perspective, and then quietly become part of the foundation on which we continue building our lives. So if someone continues to appear in your thoughts despite the silence between you, it may simply be a sign that your mind recognizes the significance of that chapter, not as a mystery that must be solved, but as a moment that contributed to your growth. And perhaps the real insight is this. Instead of searching for hidden meanings in the other person's actions, the more valuable reflection may be within yourself. What did that encounter reveal about who you were? What did it teach you about the direction you wanted your life to take? And most importantly, how has that experience shaped the person you are becoming today? Because sometimes the people who stay in our thoughts are not reminders of what we lost. They are reminders of how far we have come. Another important realization begins to appear when you reflect on this more deeply. Sometimes the mind returns to a person not because something is missing, but because something was awakened. There are encounters in life that quietly shift the way we see ourselves. Before meeting that person, you may have been moving through life in a certain pattern, following familiar routines, thinking about the world in predictable ways. Then suddenly, a conversation, a moment of understanding, or a shared experience opens a new layer of awareness. It does not have to be dramatic. Often it is subtle. But something inside you becomes more conscious, more reflective, more aware of your own thoughts, your values, and the direction you want your life to take. When that happens, the person connected to that moment becomes linked to a turning point in your personal growth. And the mind tends to remember turning points. Consider how many experiences we move through without much reflection. Daily routines, brief interactions, ordinary conversations. Most of these pass through our awareness and fade quickly because they do not challenge or transform us in any meaningful way. But when someone enters your life and causes you to think more deeply about who you are, that experience leaves a different kind of impression. Maybe they asked questions that made you reconsider your assumptions. Maybe they listened in a way that made you feel understood during a time when you were struggling to understand yourself. Or maybe the connection itself revealed qualities within you that had been hidden before: patience, courage, vulnerability, or the willingness to grow beyond your comfort zone. When that happens, the memory of that person becomes intertwined with the moment you started seeing yourself differently. And that is powerful. It means the thought that keeps appearing in your mind may actually be pointing to a chapter of transformation, a moment where something inside you began to shift. Have you ever looked back at an earlier version of yourself and realized how much you have changed? The way you handle challenges is different. The way you understand relationships is different. Even the way you see your own path in life may have evolved. Growth rarely happens all at once. It unfolds through experiences, reflections, and encounters that slowly shape our awareness. Some of those encounters are connected to people who remain in our lives for years. Others appear only briefly, but their influence can last far longer than the interaction itself. So when someone appears in your thoughts again and again, it may not be about longing or coincidence at all. It may simply be your mind acknowledging a moment when your perspective expanded, a moment when you started seeing life, relationships, or even yourself in a more thoughtful way, and recognizing that can be freeing because it allows you to appreciate the role that person played in your story without feeling trapped by the past. It allows you to understand that meaningful encounters do not always exist to last forever. Sometimes they exist to awaken something within us and then allow us to continue moving forward with greater awareness.